Hey everybody. Had an interesting discussion with Jamie Kilstein, who is a comedian, somebody who I first met in New York City a number of years ago. Hadn't really been in touch for quite a while. I was peripherally aware of some issues that he experienced in 2017-ish, having to do with various allegations that I don't even want to characterize here because we talk about them to some extent. And he obviously had a major personal ordeal stemming from that. And sort of out of nowhere, a couple days ago, he reached out to me and wanted to have me on his podcast, and I was glad to oblige. And I said that I would post a version of it on my own podcast. And, we talk about range of matters, online culture wars, his experience, our differing philosophies on how to operate within the contemporary media ecosystem, and I found it enjoyable. So here you go. How are you?
Good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Got a little bit of a cold, but I can power through it.
Fucking, has New York gotten oppressively hot yet?
It was oppressively hot. There have been a couple days where it's been oppressively hot, but it's actually been fairly mild recently. I mean, today was really nice, actually.
Nice. You know what I just thought we should do? Because I was like, when I told people you were going to be on the podcast, I was like, some people call him controversial. We should do this whole podcast about the weather.
Controversial takes on New York area humidity.
Oh yeah, not just hacky because it's the weather. It'll be the difference between LA and New York weather. So like two hacky topics merged into one.
Yeah, well, I lived in LA for a little while, so I'm actually in a position to compare and contrast.
Wait, hold on. Can we talk about this? Because when I left New York, I was like, fuck New York. New York can suck a dick. I hate it. Everyone sucks. And then when I got to LA, I was legitimately happy for like a year or two, just because it's just fucking nice. And now I'm moving out of LA in like 2 weeks, and I could not want to leave faster.
Yeah, I mean, when I was there, it was a little bit strange because I remember I first arrived in like February.
Yeah.
And there was a rainstorm. So it was like there's the biggest rainstorm since like 2006 or something like that.
Oh, Jesus.
So it entirely skewed my perception of LA weather for the remainder of my time there.
Right.
Because like the entire like infrastructure of the region breaks down if there's a modest rainstorm.
Okay. So yeah. So I had the opposite thing happen. If you were to ask any Republican to describe what they think LA is, it was my first day in LA. So I get to the airport, I take an Uber to buy a Prius, like from the airport. I have my bag, immediately go buy a Prius. Then I meet the now canceled Moby at his house.
Why was it your immediate task to buy a Prius?
Like, I don't fucking know. I was just like, this is what you do when you're in LA: is you eat vegan food and you either go to yoga or you buy a Prius.
All right, so you didn't have a car beforehand.
No, so I didn't have a car and I didn't have a place to stay. So
I actually drove cross country in my car, so I did not need to purchase a car.
Okay,
anyway.
No, I had fucking nothing. I just like took a plane. I got rid of all my shit. I had like a suitcase and backpack. And so then, I got in a Prius, and then I swear to God, it cannot get more LA than this. I went to Moby's house for a group meditation, vegan food, and whatever the fuck a sound bath is. I was like, I guess this is what LA is.
So like somehow you just knew, it just materialized in your consciousness to head on over to Moby's house.
I was like, this guy's gonna get in trouble for similar reasons to me. I should befriend him early on.
One song that I frequently sing in the shower, it's the song "Where Were You When I Was Lonesome," or it's called "When It's Cold I'd Like to Die." It was in the Sopranos. It's a Moby song.
Oh yeah.
Isn't that song that song is like very creepily good.
It's so good. Well, so I didn't actually, he used to see my stand-up in New York, and we didn't become like really good friends until I moved out here. And I remember like I didn't know a lot of his music, like at all. And like I really didn't realize how like super famous he was or super popular he was. And like I opened for him out here, but it was for like some like vegan thing. It was always like kind of niche. And like I didn't know his was the song in like the fucking Born Identity. And I remember I did a gig with him once, and I was like on the side of the stage, and it was like it was the night Trump won, so he was playing some covers. It was like a benefit for like the ACLU or something, and I was on the side of the stage, and he was playing a song, and I went to his assistant. I was like, "This song's fucking great. Who does this?" And he was like, "It's Moby's. It's Moby's most popular song." And I was like, "Oh." Yeah, totally. Don't.
Isn't his most popular song "South Side" with Gwen Stefani? Like I remember, like when I watched, that would be on MTV on like a loop. It seemed like when did that come out? Like 2000, 2001 or something?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was fucking great. Like I didn't talk about it on the show, but yeah, the whole Natalie Portman drama. It just seemed like. Are
we recording, by the way, or are we just?
Oh, we're recording. 100%.
Cool.
Yeah. No, 100%. And from now on, I'm gonna start like lulling people in with weather talk because I was like,
yeah, no, that's smart. That's smart because they'll disgrace themselves somehow with like a racist comment about the weather.
They're like, the weather reminds me of those blacks. It's like, here we fucking go, record.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about this morning. Where with the Biden thing, and I haven't talked about it on the show yet because I already recorded, but we can talk about the Biden thing specifically and what happened. But what's your take on just sort of like the need and the sort of like glee and excitement of, I mean, really jumping all over people online on social media?
Well, I mean, that's the general topic of what kind of incentives are operative within social media to jump all over people is sort of separate from what has gone on with Biden.
That's true, yeah.
With respect to Biden in particular, there's actually a really good piece on this that kind of captured some of my thinking on it by Amber Frost in The Baffler. I don't know if you're with her.
I'm so many people that I've read right now. I mean, that's why I DM'd you, not to like derail this, but so many people who I've read.
Derail away.
Yeah. So many people who I read now, I'm like, oh, I remember you from the time you tweeted me that hateful, horrible thing. Like, she used to hate me. I mean, all of the, and by the way, not because of like any of my drama. Those people hated me when I was just like, doing like we were just on the more, I hate using like social justice warrior or like woke. Like I don't know a good word to use it. How do you describe that part of the left?
Oh man, it's sort of a conundrum, right? Because when you use the word social justice warrior or SJW, everybody basically knows what sensibility you're referring to, but you almost don't want to invoke that term.
Right, because social justice should be a good fucking thing.
Or because like that term itself was invented by the opponents of those people. It's not what they self-describe as. The way I kind of frame it is like the online culture warrior left.
That's good. I like that. Yeah.
Preening, moralizing cultural liberals.
That's a little longer and not as catchy, but I definitely am going to start using it. Yeah, I remember I've said this before, and this is like not a joke. The first time someone called me a social justice warrior, I legitimately thought it was a compliment. Like, I got the tweet and was just like,
you're like, oh, thank you so much.
Dude, that's exactly what I was like. I was like, looks like this guy's on the right side of history. It was so gross. But yeah, you're right. Like, it usually is used in such a horrible, hateful way. But anyway,
But anyway, the reason I brought up Amber Frost, notwithstanding when she might have attacked you, I mean, it's funny because like I try to compartmentalize my online grudges because if I allowed them to impinge on my day-to-day life in any meaningful way, I would probably like crawl into a fetal position and not be able to function.
Oh yeah, I get it.
Or I probably would have like jumped off the George Washington Bridge in 2014 or something.
Yep.
So I just don't let it affect me in that way. It's just kind of a mental toolkit that I have at my disposal now.
I'm going to circle back to that after we talk about Biden so I can use some of those tools.
But the reason I brought up Amber Frost is she did a really good piece for The Baffler. I actually have it pulled up now because I referenced it today.
Oh, sweet.
It's I think it's from May sometime. But let me just quote from it, because she's basically ridiculing and dismissing the attempt to, quote, "Me Too" Joe Biden by various Democratic operatives and left-leaning journalists who hated him and don't want him to win the nomination. They don't even hate him, really. They're just so viscerally offended by the prospect of him winning the nomination rather than a younger, like, woman of color or something,
right,
that they decided to launch this all-out offensive to preemptively take him down even before he announced his campaign formally in April. And it failed miserably. In fact, he actually, got off to a much better start than a lot of people in the media anticipated.
Yeah.
And his lead even now in some polls is pretty formidable.
Oh, the first time I saw his poll numbers, I've just heard people shitting all over him so much. And then I saw his poll numbers and I'm like, oh, he could fucking win.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the thing that people somehow miss about him. I don't know how they could possibly miss it because it's so blaringly obvious. Maybe it's so obvious that it somehow like glides over their heads or something. But the guy was the trusted confidant of the first black president for 8 years.
Yes.
And newsflash, many of the early primary states, or at least one in particular, South Carolina, has a majority black electorate for the Democratic primaries.
Oh, yeah.
Therefore, I mean, it's their prerogative if they feel fondly toward the person who supported and facilitated the two terms of the first black president, was elected twice with him by large margins. They're probably going to be inclined to vote for that person.
Yeah,
it's not like rocket science.
Oh, I mean, all of those like Obama Biden memes, and like I spent a lot of the Obama years criticizing. I mean, fuck, I'm not allowed back on Conan because I talked about like drone strikes on about Obama.
I remember that.
But with that said, I saw my girlfriend and I saw a picture of Obama and Michelle the other day, and I have never stared so fondly at a picture. Like, and yeah, when you think of Biden, you think of Obama. And I read the weird shit I read now because I want to read that Amber Frost. But then I read an Andrew Sullivan piece that talked about like, I feel like so many times the woke left forgets that a good majority of us are privileged, college educated. I mean, I'm not, but college educated white people. And, in this article, I think it was for the New York Magazine or something. It said that Biden's numbers among minority communities are huge. And that's a big fucking deal. Like, you can't just pretend like, well, minority communities are going to vote for the black guy or the black lady. It's like, that's fucking more racist. Like, look at the polls, look how they feel. And you're totally right. There's that connection with Obama that's going to make them remember him fondly.
Yeah, I mean, his numbers are particularly huge with Southern blacks, which is a core constituency for South Carolina in particular. Obama would not have won the nomination if those voters hadn't migrated from Hillary to him in 2008.
Right.
And so that enduring legacy of Biden is going to be really hard to dispel. And the other candidates are in sort of a paradox because, on the one hand, they can't outright attack Obama, really, because Obama is still insanely popular among your average Democrat. I mean, your average Democrat is not like worried about drone strikes and Libya and like the lack of a public option.
No,
they just have
that was just us being whiny assholes on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with the contrast with Trump, I mean, half of Democrats would like sever off their limbs tomorrow just to get Obama back.
Right.
So that association with Biden is the most valuable asset, pretty much, that any candidate can have in a Democratic primary. And a lot of the people in the media almost didn't want to reckon with that reality when Biden was leading up to his formal announcement, because there had been this talk about how socialism was on the upswing in the party coalition, which is true to a marginal extent.
Sure.
But in terms of the lion's share of the party, they're still like Obama Biden Democrats, and in order to actually go after Biden, presumably what the other candidates will have to do is dispel the mystique of his association with Obama, but that would entail them attacking Obama, which they can't really do.
Right.
So it's a really hard paradox to navigate.
Yeah, if I were Biden at the debates, every time I got like a hard question, I would just slowly hold up a picture of me and Barack Obama with like our arms around each other.
It would probably work too.
Yeah.
But anyway, in the Amber Frost piece, she's basically attacking these parochial online, like professional managerial class, left-wing media and consultant people.
That was what she tweeted me. Now I remember. Okay, go on.
Who thought that they could preemptively destroy Biden by like coming up with these stories where he rubbed somebody's shoulder or something, right? And basically what she says, and I'll just quote from here in the conclusion, quote, rather than emphasizing the fact that a 76-year-old man from Scranton, Pennsylvania doesn't have the same physical boundaries as professional managerial class millennials in New York and D.C., leftists should take a break from the feminist culture wars and go after his voting record. So basically they tried to thwart Biden by reference to the kind of predominant culture war online maxims that are just second nature to them. But for the rest of the country and including the rest of the Democratic primary electorate, it's just not a salient issue.
That's a really good point. So Amber, in a weird way, is like attacking part of the left while also attacking Biden from the actual left. So she's saying like, there are people who are like, we have to go after Biden because of his support for the credit card industries or for his blah, blah, blah. And then we're so used to this sort of ultra hypersensitive culture wars that we're like, he rubbed a child's shoulders and we think that's going to be it. So we're not going after his record. We're going after these kind of just like dumb, salacious stories of like a grandpa acting like a grandpa to a kid.
Yeah. And I mean, and you can go at, and here's another conundrum, which is that often you'll see some old Biden clip from like 1979 or 1994 resurfacing where he says something salaciously bad, according to the left-wing Twitter personality who unearthed it. And most of the time, on the substance, what Biden was saying is bad. Like, I mean, there's one clip from the early 90s where he's advocating for the crime bill, and he was basically musing about how awesome it would be if people spent longer time in prison.
Right.
So, yeah, that's
and this
bad.
is the crime bill under Clinton, right?
Right. Yes. But Biden kind of led the legislative process to shepherd that to Bo Clinton's desk.
Sure.
But most Democratic primary voters don't know of Biden because of some remark or vote that he cast decades ago. They know him because of Obama.
Right.
So it's just like the only aspect of Biden's record that hasn't really been scrutinized thus far is the one reason why he's in contention in the first place, which was the 8-year vice presidency.
Yeah. I mean, I loved, when I first saw Biden speak, I didn't know anything. I was young and I didn't know a lot about like politics, and I just saw him speak a bunch and was fucking thrilled. Like, he was just a captivating speaker and seemed like a genuinely good guy. And he told that tragic story about his family. And then I think a lot of people know that Biden and then just kind of cut to Obama years, like you said. And
yeah.
Compared, and then you have
avuncular sidekick years.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is too, what people don't want to talk about, and I talked about this with Rania last week, but just like you were talking about with the language of social justice warrior, I feel like when it comes to identity politics and stuff like that, whenever we hear that kind of language invoked, it's usually from a cartoonishly evil Republican, like screaming at like a Mexican mother, right? But there's still, what people forget is there's still a ton of moderate Democrats that like don't give a fuck about the esoteric issues that we're bitching about on Twitter. And someone like Joe Biden is very, very attractive to them.
And some of those moderate, quote unquote, Democrats encompass like black Democrats, especially Southern black Democrats. Totally. I mean, just because you're a black Democrat doesn't mean that you're necessarily left wing. I mean, a lot of black Democrats are more religious than the average.
Yep.
So I think there's an oversimplification that gets done by. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze, and I'm going to totally interrupt my train of thought. It's going away. It's going away. I'm good. The sneeze has been suppressed. Yes, good. It was a racist sneeze anyway.
I was gonna wonder if it was just you talking to your Russian cohorts in your earpiece, and you were like, "Oh, a sneeze is like code word for like the reception's going out."
Yeah, I get a ruble for every sneeze.
Great. Well, what I was going to bring up
I was just going to say, I mean, I was all leading it all up to say is that you're right in that, I mean, your first impression of Biden I can kind of relate to. And I remember feeling the same way. I remember hoping, because I worked, not officially, but I volunteered very extensively for Obama in 2007, 2008. And I remember hoping that he would pick Biden because I felt that it would be the best compliment to him on the ticket. And he ended up doing so. But that's because Biden is just a very skilled political rhetorician. That's what he's been doing his entire life. In 2007 and 2008, arguably he was just the best outright debater amongst the candidates who ran that year, including Obama and Hillary.
Oh, yeah.
And in 2012, he destroyed Paul Ryan in the vice presidential debate and, changed the narrative because Obama had, quote unquote, lost the first debate to Romney. So I think people err if they dismiss or downplay his raw skill. Now the question is, does he have the cognitive faculties at age 76 to keep that going?
Right.
I don't know. It's an open question. I mean, I watched today. He gave a speech in Iowa. He seemed fine to me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think that's going to be a major issue. But if you in the rough and tumble of a televised debate, who knows?
Well, real quick, just for people who didn't know the drama today, it's been very similar to the drama before where, he uses the word sweetie or, today I think he the way they describe it, man, is so creepy how they're using kids. They're he put his hands on a 13-year-old girl's shoulders. And it's if you look at it in context, he's not creeping up to her in a fucking parking lot and massaging her. But then yeah. I guess the big line today and the question I wanted to ask you was he said something like, how old are you? And she said 13. And he looked at her brothers and was keep the boys away from her or something like that. When people make that a trending topic on Twitter or act outraged, do you even believe they're outraged? Or do you think it's just sort of partisan? They know they're not supposed to like Biden because he's the old white guy, just like they're not supposed to like Bernie. And so they're just feigning outrage.
I feel like 2 years ago or 5 years ago or sometime in the very recent past, a remark like that would have just been – it wouldn't even have registered. It would have just been acknowledged as even a wholesome quip by an older male that was done not out of any malevolence, but just in a way that older males and even women, interact with kids, and it's lighthearted. I mean, I feel like most people in the country automatically recognize that kind of remark. And it doesn't.
If he walked up to her and was like, "How old are you? 13? Don't dress like a whore." Then it's hey, we got to talk about Biden.
Yeah, but they were saying that Biden was sexualizing her.
Right. Which I, in no way, even at my most whatever I was, it's you can say, maybe you could do some mental jujitsu to be he was, it's patronizing, or you could say oh, when you're talking to a girl, she has to be protected, but sexualizing is insane. He wasn't oh, there's going to be a line of guys wanting to railroad your hot sister. He literally said what every father will say, or what every older brother will say, or like you said, even girls, when they, meet a dad of a girl, watch out for when she gets into high school, and those boys, it's just a hacky, generic parental thing to say.
And even older women say stuff. I mean, it's just so common in huge swaths of the country that aren't kind of inculcated in this online culture war hysteria that, again, it wouldn't even register them as a novel remark. What really aggravates me, or what really at least arouses my annoyance, is that what these people do is that they act outraged on behalf of other people who are not, by all accounts, themselves outraged. So do we have any indication that the girl was upset by it? Was the girl's parents upset? Did they find it offensive? No, I don't. There's no reason to believe that. It hasn't been reported. I mean, it was probably just interpreted by the people who actually were in the interaction.
Also, by the way, what the
innocuous.
Fuck is this? Yeah, and what's this girl going to think now when she sees it in the news? And it's suddenly this big fucking deal.
Right. And it's kind of an extension of what Amber was castigating, because there was a similar phenomenon when they were trying to actually Me Too Joe Biden, but they would get these clips of Biden rubbing the shoulders of women. And one of these women who like had a screen grab put on her, and then it was like made fun of on late night TV, and like I guess her friends are texting her or whatever. She ended up having to put out a Medium post the next day saying, "Hey, let me speak for myself as to whether I found this to be disturbing or invasive," and I did not.
Whoa.
Biden, I've been friendly for years. He was comforting me after like she fell on the ice or something, and she was upset, and her husband was being nominated for a position, and Biden was just comforting her, and she thought she appreciated it, and yet her experience, quote unquote, was being culturally appropriated by people who wanted to use it to stoke this kind of phony outrage.
Right. Yeah, man. I mean, do you think that? So there are all these articles that I think relieved a ton of us, which were talking about how Twitter, even though the voices are the loudest, are not representative of the majority of people. That's great, right? But do you, I mean, you see it more than I do because I'm still kind of like tiptoeing back onto Twitter. But do you think that even though the voices aren't the loudest, it still affects the narrative of the entire country, or it's just like the trending bullshit we're talking about that day? Like I saw someone tweet the other day, if you ever want to feel or like realize how like silly Twitter is or social media is, try to describe like a fight you had to like someone who's not on Twitter. Like so many times you're like, well, this person, and they're like, I don't know who that is. And you're like, well, they were talking to the Chapo people, and they're like, I don't know who. And it really is like a fucking bubble.
It's like a high school cafeteria.
Yes.
But no, there are a couple things to kind of differentiate there. Number one, yes, it is true that the political sentiments that you see bubble up through whatever algorithmic process on Twitter are not representative of the country at large. I think everybody can pretty much recognize that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, that doesn't diminish the overall importance of Twitter. And I really do think that Twitter every day gets more significant in terms of dictating how American culture, whether politically or otherwise, gets crafted. I mean, do you see any sign that it's becoming less influential? I see it integrated more and more into all platforms.
Right.
The president uses it as his primary communications mechanism.
He sure does.
Every single politician is on it in terms of how they release their public statements now. If you're almost regarded as not having a public presence if you don't have it.
Right.
So when people malign Twitter as not representative of the country, yes. But I saw a study somewhat recently where, like, I guess I could actually even pull it up now because I want to get the number right. But it was something like they examined how many active users are on Twitter, and hold on, let me just pull it up 1 second.
Yeah, this is gonna fucking horrify me.
This is gonna blow your mind.
Yeah.
Not really. I'm just kind of.
It's like just 45 angry people.
Yeah. Let's see.
Because while you look for that,
exciting podcast content right here as I scroll through tweets aimlessly.
Don't worry, I'll take care of it. In Los Angeles right now, it is 72 degrees. It is.
Okay, I got it.
Great.
So basically, according to this study, 24% of U.S. adults use Twitter. Okay, and that's around probably like 70 to 75 million people because you have to exclude children.
Sure.
But children are also using it as well. So let's just say 75 million people in the United States use Twitter.
Keep Biden away from those kids. Am I right?
Right. But that means Twitter's gonna be skewed in terms of the political preferences of the entire electorate if you try to extrapolate from Twitter onto the rest of the country. But 75 million people is a lot of people.
Right.
So whatever political preferences get expressed on Twitter can't be dismissed as insignificant. They just have to be understood as reflecting sort of a skewed and parochial demographic.
Do you think it's keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. No. So I was just gonna say. I'm not a Twitter pessimist in the sense that I think it has a lot of distorting effects, obviously, and if you don't use it in a mindful way, it can kind of like drive you crazy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't see its influence waning at all. I actually think it's growing, and it's becoming even more integral to just the manufacture of culture whether in the entertainment field or the political field. I mean, I've heard somebody told me that who's like someone in the entertainment industry told me that one of the major production companies optioned a Twitter thread for a movie.
Jesus Christ!
Like they actually paid a guy who did a viral Twitter thread.
Of course.
And they're now that's being made into a movie. I mean, that's just one example.
Well, we see that in articles. Articles taking down people that's not reporting, or they don't talk to people. They just kind of capture the screenshots of the hot takes.
Yeah, and also think about it this way. I mean, every single cable news producer is on Twitter all day. That's how they program their segments.
Right.
So you kind of have this. You have this like all-consuming synergy between Twitter and the rest of the elite media. So I think it really is worth keeping abreast of Twitter, even if only for the purpose of like discerning what the cultural and political elites are talking about, because they're obviously an influential segment.
Well, so okay, kind of changing the subject, but kind of not, because it's Twitter. I wanted to. I just thought of this, and I don't know if you had a take on it or if you tweeted it. I missed it. But what do you think of? So we're super like tribalized online, right? And a lot of center left people, or even a lot of like liberals who talk to anyone on the right, are sort of automatically deemed alt-right. I would love actually to talk about, maybe after this question, I would love to talk about your thoughts on that YouTube article about the like making of a right-wing extremist. I haven't talked about that yet.
Yeah.
But what did you think when? So look. Here's the thing with Dave Rubin is his kind of talking point is he's a gay liberal who was pushed away by liberals, and now he's classical liberal. And then, but what everyone else will say is like, cool, you're only interviewing conservatives, and it seems like pretty much all your views are conservative. Whatever. Peter Buttigieg was going to go on his show, and then there was such an outcry for him not to go on his show by parts of the left that he canceled. Bernie Sanders got a very similar backlash when he went on Fox News. Do you think it's important and could even be seen as like a victory for someone on the left, especially like Rubin's show? Like, I know a lot of liberals, like I've watched episodes. I know a lot of liberals who have watched episodes and stuff like that. They're not all conservatives watching that show. Do you think it's important for them to go on these types of shows, or are you kind of the Elizabeth Warren mindset of like, at least with Fox News, this show propagates hate and lies and racism, and like, fuck them, I'm not giving them the ad dollars?
Yeah. Well, my problem with Dave Rubin is not that he's a conservative per se, or a classical liberal, or whatever term he uses. It's that he seems to engage purely in the arena of like combating SJWs, and there's so much more to politics than debunking or destroying, in all caps, whatever the latest culture war outrage is.
Sure.
And it feels like that's just almost entirely what his niche has become. And so I do find him a little shallow and tedious. And also because, he kind of did this whole shtick where he left melodramatically from the Young Turks and crafted that into an entire identity where, I didn't leave the left left me. I mean, that's a routine that has been a common sort of trope for decades. I mean, Ronald Reagan said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me." This has been going on.
I forgot about that. I mean, dude, I was offered a book deal to do that because, like, I wrote one piece for Quillette, and people were like, "We got another one," and I was like, "No, I'm still like fucking really liberal."
Yeah. So ironically, Rubin uses his identity as the basis to propagate whatever it is that his political vision consists of. Because I'm gay. I was at a particular media organization. He always invokes his own like personal traits.
Identity politics, man.
So he's engaging in a form of identity politics, which is the height of irony. And also, I in principle am in favor of engaging with almost anybody. I go on all kinds of shows and podcasts. I go on Tucker Carlson, which like people give me hell about.
Oh, I didn't know that. But I could have made this question far less esoteric and just asked you.
yeah, exactly.
Well, I see Greenwald.
Exactly. But I wouldn't.
I see Glenn get a lot of shit when he goes on Tucker Carlson as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously much higher profile than me, so he's like shit is exponentially greater. But I get it a bit. But I don't think I would be inclined not to go on Dave Rubin just because we both were at the Young Turks at a certain point, and therefore my going on his show would automatically get construed as like me taking up with the guy who was exiled from the Young Turks, and like I'm trying to get in on his grift, quote unquote, or something.
Well, so
just my own kind of like self-interest, I probably wouldn't do it. But in theory, I go on all. I go on conservative talk radio all the time. Again, if you go on Tucker, like you're automatically considered evil now. So I mean, that's like the crown jewel of this.
Well, Tracey, now I don't feel as cool about this get that I thought I got for my podcast. Now that fucking anybody can get you. Well, do you think Mayor Pete should have gone on his show? And then I want to talk about your mindset about Carlson and the shit you get for that. But do you think that like if a show is big enough, so I mean like Tulsi Gabbard went on Rogan, right? And Rogan was listed in the alt-right article. Do you think that if a show is as big as Joe Rogan's or Dave Rubin's is really fucking popular, that something good could have been accomplished if Buttigieg went on?
Well, I mean, I actually think Buttigieg would have been uniquely suited to going on a show like that because he's a thoughtful person. He's very intelligent. Killed it. Yeah. Yeah, I think he's like probably has the highest IQ of any candidate running.
Yeah.
Maybe other than Warren, but I think he would have actually come across well in that format, and so if he buckled to pressure simply because people were complaining about it, then I think that reflects badly on him. If he had otherwise wanted to go on, but only chose not to because he thought that he had to appease the people who were screaming about it, then, I mean, that's stupid. He already done a town hall on Fox News, so is it that much different? Tulsi going on Rogan is interesting. I was just actually with Tulsi on Saturday all day in New York, and I did a podcast with her as well in March. That was, other than Rogan, probably the most extensive, like, long-form interview that she's done, and she's actually really good in that format.
Yeah, she is.
And she's really personable and relatable, and I have to, like, try to maintain my objectivity and not be too effusive about her, but I do like her.
Yeah.
But obviously that served Tulsi perfectly, not just because she was on Rogan, but she was the first sitting politician, never mind presidential candidate, to ever go on Rogan. So you're reaching an entirely different audience than is normally going to be available to you. I mean, a lot of people who watch Rogan aren't really fervently political. I mean, maybe they have a little bit of a political edge, but that's not like, they probably don't spend all their waking moments thinking about like what, I don't know, Dianne Feinstein said it on a typical morning or something.
Right. And they're gonna, even if they don't agree, it's like you're gonna get a lot of respect for doing it. And this is the problem, I think, where if we're just so concerned about like our team winning, it's like, well, wouldn't you want Mayor Pete to go on Rubin and maybe convince some of Rubin's on the fence people that not all Democrats are wieners? Wouldn't you want someone like you or Greenwald to go on Tucker Carlson, like, or especially Bernie? I mean, dude, I remember like my grandparents, who I love very much, totally were changed once Fox News came around because they were old people and Fox News scared the shit out of them. And so like for Bernie Sanders to go on and actually thoughtfully explain his position and how he's actually defending them and not trying to make us all like work in the fields, I think that's a really good thing. But again, with these Twitter mobs and this Twitter outrage, all we want to do is find reasons to be like, to catch someone fucking up, you know? Yeah. And I think it's really dangerous for, if you talk to a person who disagrees with you politically, you can get canceled for that because it's like, well, those are the people we're trying to sway on the issues.
Yeah. My guiding principle for determining whether I should go on any media venue is, am I going to be inhibited from saying what it is that I believe to be true?
Right.
And if the answer is no, generally speaking, I will go on the show or the podcast or whatever. And the fact is, just as you didn't impose any restrictions on me today, although the Russians talking in my earpiece might be doing so subconsciously.
Yeah, I can edit that out after.
Just as well, I've never been restricted from saying anything on Fox News or Tucker. So,
Right.
so I mean, that's my really main criteria. And I say just what if I go on Tucker, I say the exact same thing that I would say if I was on a left-wing podcast. So I'm sorry if people don't like that or they think that I'm somehow abetting fascism. I just don't view it that way. Actually, when I've been on Tucker, there have been times where I've incorporated criticisms of not just Fox News, but Trump.
Yep.
And actually have gotten like Tucker to agree with me.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I've gone on a bunch of conservative podcasts. I went on a couple shows on like Shapiro's network. I did some show on like the Blaze. You know, I used to have like a press blurb of Glenn Beck calling me a doofus like on my resume. And I will tell you that I have gotten some of the most thoughtful, and again, I don't say anything different. And I've gotten some of the most thoughtful emails and podcast listens from people who are like, hey, I don't agree with you, but this, and this, or, but, oh, I'm starting to become more liberal on this, or, you know, now I can understand like what my dumb teenager's been thinking, whatever. And it's like, that is so much more important. I do not want to live in a world where I think everyone is a fucking Nazi. And I feel like when smart liberals can get into these, or get on these shows, I think it can do a lot of good.
One of the problems here is that the standards for what constitutes guilt by association have become so elastic now.
Yes.
That it can encompass anything. Like you're giving a platform or you're amplifying somebody simply by virtue of talking to them. And I think that's a really dangerous standard. I mean, I don't think that necessarily by virtue of talking to someone you are in any way legitimizing them or you're giving them airtime or whatever, especially if part of what you're doing is being a public figure of some sort, and that entails going out into public and expressing your views. I mean, so elastic has this notion of guilt by association gotten that I'm not exaggerating when I say that one of the central criticisms of me online since 2016 has been that people who are perceived to be Trump supporters like engage with my tweets.
Right.
So somehow I am associated with those people purely because they tweet me or they retweet me. Like I don't have any association with them, right? It's just people like cursorily scanning what they see on Twitter and then thereby drawing this kind of causal connection between me and those people. It's the most insane, absurd thing imaginable, but it has been such a dominant theme in terms of what people condemn for.
Yeah, I mean,
and at this point, I'm so inured to the accusation that I just kind of like it doesn't even register anymore.
well, it's so silly. And again, especially if you're holding true and saying the thing. Yeah, like Mike Cernovich retweeted some like Game of Thrones shit I did. And like the lefties in that thread where it's just like, Jesus Christ, man. Like we can agree on a TV show thing. Like that's okay. And also, I like the fact that right-wing people will engage with me and will engage with you because that means we can have actual dialogue. Now, with that said, because I see you online as a brave shit stirrer, but I'm like, we've also hung out. I know that there's got to be a terrified artist deep down inside of you. When you first got offered Tucker, did you debate it? Did you check with friends? Or were you, but by that point, because I'm not sure on your timeline when that was, or by that point, were you just like, fuck it? Because I'll be honest with you, part of the reason I go on conservative shows is because they're the only ones that are having me right now. And I do wonder if I would have been as brave or if I would have been more self-righteous about not doing it, if that wasn't the case.
No, I didn't consult with anybody. I just did it. I mean, I first went on in 2016, actually, before Tucker had his primetime show. He had, he was one of the co-anchors of the weekend, like Fox and Friends, and I had written a piece for the Daily Beast on media coverage of Trump, and it wasn't a pro-Trump piece, but it was critical of some like the dominant liberal themes in terms of Trump's depiction, just because I felt like they were not covering him properly and we're gonna miss his strengths and potentially he could win the election, which was like roughly borne out.
Well, it's the Biden thing again, where they're just going after the dumb, salacious stuff instead of like the dangerous stuff.
Yeah, basically that's what I was arguing. If people want to look it up, it was called like The Media Has a Trump-Sized Blind Spot, Daily Beast, September 2016. But Tucker saw it, and he contacted me and had me come on the show, and I just did it. And then I was on his he had another. I was on his. He was filling in, I think, for one of the primetime hosts later on in 2016, and I went a couple more times. But then I went to the Young Turks for a year and a half or so, and I didn't do any other media really.
Right.
And then after I left, he started inviting me back on again, and I've just gone. I mean, I haven't really overthought it. Again, the criteria that has always been animating my decisions in this regard is, can I say what I would say in any other forum?
Right.
And the answer to that has always been yes. I don't really care if people, are work themselves into a fit over like the extraneous moral considerations of appearing on the top cable news network in the country. I mean, it seems like a pretty straightforward decision to me. I mean,
again, it would be one thing if you went on and you were like, hey, how about those Jews? And then you go on like then it's. I mean that's how I've always felt. That's how I felt with taking sponsors. It's like you can sell out with anything, but you can also like stay pure no matter what, as long as it's not affecting your content. Do you remember there was this fucking article, I think it was in Jacobin, when like they found out how much money Amy Goodman, the host of Democracy Now!, was making, and they were like outraged. And I was like, I
don't think that was Jacobin, but I do remember something like that.
Oh, it was like a whole thing on Twitter, and I was like, I want Amy Goodman to be a billionaire. I want her to be so fucking rich and have so much power, and that's when it comes down to the sort of like hipster politics, where it's like no one that you talk to outside in a Starbucks is going to have any fucking idea what this article or who Amy Goodman even is, unfortunately. Where it's
my thinking is I'm so past the point where I feel like I need to demonstrate my quote unquote progressive bona fides with any of these Twitter screamers. I worked at the Young Turks, which is the flagship quote unquote progressive YouTube / online media outlet. I when I first met you, it was around the time I was writing for The Nation magazine.
Yep.
And Mother Jones.
Literally, speaking of just as bad as my LA cliche Moby sound bath, I believe me and you were on a rooftop in Brooklyn.
Yeah, we have been on a rooftop in Brooklyn, which is like
as fucking
will cause a lot of people here. If a lot of people hearing that will immediately pull their hair out.
Oh yeah, probably like drinking Paps, both wearing flannels.
Right, it's true though. But I have enough self. I don't want to be overconfident, but I at least have adequate confidence in my principles.
Sure.
That I don't feel like I need to constantly be performing for people who would have me pigeonholed into a particular kind of like ghetto in terms of where you can venture ideologically. I feel like that's so stifling. And I just refuse to do it. I mean, it's always kind of been my guiding philosophy to write for everybody across the spectrum because it kind of hones your critical thinking skills. So in addition to The Nation and Mother Jones, which I was writing for when I met you, I was writing for the American Conservative magazine, which is a paleo-conservative magazine, and I could write whatever I wanted. I just wanted to have my feet in all kinds of media so that I was never just catering to one particular audience. I wanted the arguments that you make have to be rock solid if you know that basically everybody across the political spectrum is going to be consuming them. And in fairness to people who would criticize me for going on Tucker, for example, it is true that most of the time I've been invited to go on, it's been because I've been critical of the prevailing liberal narratives around Trump Russia, and that at least on a superficial level is in sync with the predominant Republican narrative on those stories, although it comes from a different fundamental philosophical standpoint. But I don't really care if people think that necessarily means I'm abetting Trump. I think the Trump Russia stuff has been a total joke. I mean, Greenwald and I have been on that beat since the beginning.
Yep.
And so I'm not going to alter my perspective simply because some people might get offended if I voice my criticisms on a particular medium. I mean, I feel like that would be almost more of a betrayal than declining to go on.
No, I totally agree. So when you say you have your principles, because I feel like, and especially because I have a lot of conservatives that listen to the show now and moderates, like, how do you define those principles? What kind? Because there's so much fucking liberal infighting that I feel like people don't even know what they stand for. They just see what's trending on Twitter and then like get angry with their team. What are your kind of basic principles that you stand by?
Yeah, they've kind of evolved somewhat because how I think about portraying them has evolved. Because in many of the interviews I do, you're not the first by any stretch. Almost invariably, a question that eventually comes up is like, "What are you? Are you a progressive? Are you like a libertarian? Are you like a secret Republican? What's the deal?"
And you're like, "Hold on, I have to sneeze."
yeah. Then the Russians maliciously induce a sneeze in me. But basically, how I respond to that is I am not that wedded to self-categorization. I feel like I would rather defend a particular argument or defend like a piece of reporting that I've done or an interview or an observation or something rather than defend like progressive with a capital P or whatever other ideological label people want to assign, because I feel like those terms are so fluid and malleable anyway that it could almost mean anything to anyone. So why, at least, especially if I'm operating in a journalistic capacity, which also obviously entails doing analysis and opinion, I don't know. I'd rather just refrain from giving in to the demand that I self-categorize. I mean, I tell people who I vote for.
Sure.
I mean, so it's not that I'm not transparent, right?
Right.
I tell people who I vote for, what my positions are in various issues, what outlets I've worked for can speak for itself in a way. But I just feel like there's always this, temptation to want to lapse into like the safe harbor of an ideological label. Because then if you say you're progressive, right, then people can and then you make an argument. People can say to themselves, "Oh, I'm also a progressive, therefore I agree with the person who is a progressive saying this." And my point is, no, agree or disagree with what I'm saying on the basis of your own reasoning, not because you feel like you have some kind of superficial affinity with whatever label that you've attributed to me. So I feel like it lends itself to lazy thinking, and that's what I try to discourage.
Cool. So I'm just going to write down Republican. Do you? I mean, this question is more.
Cool.
What's that?
I said word.
Great. This question's more as like a pep talk for me, but I'm sure a lot of people could relate to it. Where I didn't know you wrote for those conservative places, and that's great. Like right now, I'm writing. I've written for like Quillette and this new one called like the Post Millennial, and they're both more conservative. And I will admit, my first instinct was, all right, I guess I got to find stuff that just they'll be angry about. So like problems with the left, but it's not that. I can write whatever the fuck I want. Kind of same deal with what you said. And I feel like it's helping. Knowing that I'm not just speaking to my tribe is really helping, but it also like it takes a lot longer to build an audience and to make money. I mean, the amount of money I was making when I was just like, I have my team, I know where I stand on everything, and I know who I'm screaming at every day, was far greater than I just want to talk to everybody and be principled and blah, blah, blah. Were there times when, like for you, was it slower for your audience to grow, or was it just wherever you were, people would sort of jump on board, and because you were kind of, I don't know, committed to principles, you just, again, like, didn't give a shit?
Well, my audience, such as it exists, initially really grew exponentially in 2016, just because there was a lot of intense attention, obviously, around the election. I seem to have a somewhat idiosyncratic or at least an interpretation of events that wasn't 100% in line with either predominant partisan viewpoint.
Yeah.
And there were people who I think appreciated that, and also people who hated it. And
Yeah, it gets you
hate
shit
me
from both
to
sides
this day.
too.
Yeah, and who hate me to this day. But I think eventually, over time, people tend to recognize that I had somewhat of an independence of mind. Again, I don't want to toot my own horn, but they appreciated the perspective that I was bringing to the fore, and it was just never an instinct for me to preach to the choir in the way that it may have been for you. So the trajectory is a little different.
Sure.
Even I try not to even ascertain who my supporters are on Patreon or PayPal or whatever else, but to the extent that they tell me who they are, it really does run the gamut.
Yeah.
I mean, there are left-wing peacenik people and right-wing Trump people.
Dude, I got the same. Yeah, I got the exact same. And it's kind of something I'm proud of where, yeah, I'll have 17-year-old gay punks and then 50-year-old conservatives in the church. But you're also making the right move because, now that I'm finally making a living with a podcast again, but, not nearly where I was before, and it's in the building phase. There is part of me when I look too closely, I can find myself starting to self-censor. If I'm like, oh, cool, another big lefty followed me on Twitter, and then there's something dumb the left did that I want to tweet about, I'll pull back for a second, or it seems like only conservatives are joining the Patreon. Maybe I shouldn't cover the Palestine thing. But then I stop giving a shit because you have to, because it'll be inauthentic. And I think that the reason people are drawn to you is because even when they disagree with you, you're authentic. And that's something no one can take away from you.
Yeah, I like to think so. And there definitely is a danger of sorts to especially if you're crowdfunding, to too closely examine who it is you're receiving funds from and then try to placate them with material that you think is going to flatter their sensibilities. So even on my Patreon page, I say outright, if you're expecting total disagreement or total agreement and that's a condition of your contributorship, don't bother.
Nice.
Because that is just never – that's inevitably corrupting. I just can't do that.
That's great.
So, that's just kind of the guiding ethos of what I do. And, I think it served me well. I mean, I write for the New York Daily News now. I write for The Spectator, which is a British magazine that has a U.S. component. That's one of my most frequent places I contribute to. Cool. I have some other big pieces that are going to be coming out in some publications that I don't want to say right now because it'll preempt it and maybe get me into trouble.
Yep.
But
I do the same.
I just don't. I'm not in a position now where I feel like I need to please everybody. If you hate me, okay, fine. I'll even talk to my haters, and I usually offer to have discussions with them. Sometimes they accept. Most of the time they don't.
Yep.
But you can't please everybody. I mean, and if you did, there would probably be something wrong with you. So why bother trying?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what the best comics always said, where it's if you're not offending a certain amount of, or not even offending, but it's if everyone's liking you, yeah, you're doing something wrong. All right.
Yeah. Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
So I remember, I'm trying to think of when this was, but when you first returned from the wilderness, I remember I listened to your comeback Rogan appearance.
Yeah, it was I feel like probably 2 years ago, 2 fall, Novembers ago.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. Do you feel, how did that appearance come about? Did you reach out to try to arrange that? And do you think that was enough? Was that a springboard for you to come back in the way that you did? How did stuff unfold following that?
Kind of. I mean, from a business standpoint, I didn't play it well. So what happened was the weekend before, Rogan's wasn't the first podcast I did. So the weekend before, this comic Doug Stanhope, do you know Doug?
Yeah, I know. I don't know him personally,
yeah,
but
so
I know him.
Doug's great. And I just, when all that stuff went down, and I've talked about it on the show before.
And by the way, I was peripherally aware of some of that stuff. I remember reading, I guess, a Jezebel article, and I'm not paying it that much mind, frankly, because there was so much else going on. I feel like that was at the absolute peak of early Trump administration craziness. So there's almost only so much energy you can expend on like a fleeting
Gossip.
Gossip controversy where like the CIA is leaking like crazy stuff every other day.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so when it first happened, I mean, essentially what got me in the biggest trouble, I feel like, was I turned hard on comedy. Like when I feel like I failed something, one of the things that I've been working on is instead of just being like, hey, comedy wasn't for me, I'm going to go down more of this, political path. I don't know if it's because of shame or what it is, but I just go, fuck comedy. Like, I didn't watch comedy specials for like 30 years. Like, it's just like, you're dead to me. And so Rogan and I, before this, years and years ago, got in this huge fight when...
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, the whole like feminism thing. And so a lot of my friends, Rogan, Stanhope, a lot of these comics were just kind of like, oh, I guess Jamie's out. Like, Jamie's not a comic anymore. And so I doubled down on it and was like, fuck comedy. And so anytime a comedian said something offensive, the part of the left I was on was already mad about it. And I would be so excited to jump on board because I was jealous and angry and embarrassed and felt like I failed. And so then all that stuff happens. And all these comics that I trashed, I mean, dude, me and you only hung out once or twice. And I'm still pretty sure you don't follow me on Twitter. Like, we were never close. I never expected like a phone call from you. I just liked your work from afar. And I do actually think I was like jealous as you started to get bigger. Like, I may not have liked you. Usually it's the other way around. But I just constructed.
Hey, that's all right. I mean, if I took any of this stuff personally, any of these kind of like weird, petty online grudges that develop for reasons that people who have the grudges can't even really articulate.
Yeah.
Again, I would be totally immobilized.
Great.
So I'm not offended at all.
Well, and like I said, I mean, there were times where I was just like, oh, I'm probably just jealous that he's like successful or going on these shows or whatever. So when my stuff happened, and this isn't for me to like, play the victim or anything like that, but...
And also, I mean, we were always sort of like doing different stuff. I was more in journalism, you were more in comedy, so I never like felt we were even
and also
competitors or anything.
Well, I talked to Rania about this because Rania used to be like one of my closest friends, and there just came a point where my side of the left was feuding with her side of the left, and we just we didn't trash each other, but we just stopped talking. And so anyway, again, not to be like wham me, but like that was when all that happened is like you lose everything. And it was the second time I was suicidal, but the first time I was like planning it and gonna do it and like getting the gear. And I talked about being suicidal before on my old podcast. I've, talked about Rubin, who is a really good friend of mine. I've talked about depression so much. That was one of the things that I was the most proud of the show is, the emails we got from kids who we helped with suicide or depression or whatever. And dude, nobody on that rooftop, like, I just went silent. Like, a dude with suicidal history, everybody who called me to get them on MSNBC, anybody who called me to try to get them hooked up to the Nation, like, whenever they wanted shit, nobody texted to be like, hey, are you alive? Are you okay? And
see, that's depressing to me. I feel like I would like to think if you and I had a closer relationship, because we were just like kind of friendly acquaintances, not like we were ever close at all. But I feel like if we had been close to the point that I would have asked you for favors in that way or something, that I would have reached out in that scenario. But it was never really our relationship, such as it existed, didn't really lend itself to that at that point.
Yeah. No. And I mean, even like I talked to Rania afterwards, and like Rania kind of brought it up on the show and started throwing down, which was kind of cool. But she was just like, yeah, I should have reached out. I mean, the thing, again, with this like toxic like cancel culture and guilt by association that you were talking about is people feel like they're going to get in trouble if they reach out to a friend and just be like, you okay? And we're not talking about like fucking gross like Harvey Weinsteins and stuff like that. But yeah, it's sort of.
I mean, there are other people who were, basically driven off social media and even driven out of their desired fields entirely by like the shitty media men list.
Right.
There are people who I did reach out into that in that context to just to see how they were doing, what's going on here.
Totally.
Who I was a little closer with. So yeah, I mean, I did actually see that unfold in a way that was really disturbing.
And by the way, dude, I've had people reach out to me who I don't know, who are like, hey, I went through a similar thing. Like, do you have any advice? And like, I haven't always reached out back because I'm like, I don't fucking know who you are. I don't know if you did anything. And like, I kind of feel guilty about that, but I get it. So anyway, back to your question is the only people who reached out to me to make sure I was alive were comics. The people I had spent years shitting on. So Stanhope, Rogan, Provenza reached out to make sure I was alive. And I didn't respond to anybody because I wasn't responding to anybody. And then years later, I saw some comedy special or I saw Doug and I texted him something like vilely offensive and was like, I'm allowed to say that now because progressives don't like me. And Doug was like, you got to come back to comedy. He was doing a live podcast at Bill Burr's first comedy festival. So I was like the surprise guest. It was like me, Morgan Murphy, and Bert Kreischer. And that was sort of like my first coming back, but everyone was like all fucking, like Bert was drunk. It just turned into chaos. And it was great. It was fun. But Rogan texted me the next day and was like, hey, do you want to do like a more articulate version of that? And then I went on that Monday. So to answer your question with my career, one, I kind of fucked up because I didn't have a podcast and I was off social media. So anybody who's talking about, I just didn't want to be known as like a creep. Like I just accepted I wasn't going to perform anymore. I was teaching jujitsu. But I didn't clear my name. So I'm like, I'll go on, I'll clear my name. If it goes well, maybe I'll do comedy again, was my thought. But I had nothing to plug. So now when people talk about, oh, if you go on Joe Rogan's, you're automatically a best-selling author or, a famous comedian. I'm like, not if you're a dipshit like me, where I didn't even have a Twitter to promote. But my thought was also that me and Joe were friends and we had a falling out that dumb me was like, it'll be disingenuous. I was like, I just want to go on as a friend and kind of clear that shit. So,
by the way, why does it seem that so many comedy podcasts, not that I'm really in that world that much, but like so many comedy podcasts seem like they're about comics getting together who had a falling out and like resolving whatever issues they had.
Because
like
comics are pieces of shit.
It seems like the operating premise of like the Mark Iron podcast, or at least the early ones.
Oh my God, totally. He used to, I did one of his early ones. And yeah, he would like open up pretty much every podcast like apologizing, right?
Yeah. It's like Larry David, like basically every episode of Computer Enthusiasm. Like,
well, even when
apologizing for things.
Even when I direct messaged you, and I feel like a lot of liberals I've like reconnected with, I'm like, hey, I wasn't a dick to you, right? Follow up. Do you want to come on my podcast?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly don't remember you ever being a dick to me, and even if you did, I don't think I was. I think I was just like silently, maybe like behind my back or something. But I mean,
yeah, I think I was just silently seething. But yeah, so nothing really huge happened. I mean, I think it's my pinned tweet now. So I think now it still does me a lot of good, and it's a nice thing to kind of have people be like, yo, I watched you on Rogan, that's fucked up what happened to you. And to hear it from that angle is really nice. But I haven't gone on since the podcast. So like from a career point of view, I can't really tell you about that boost. But it was just definitely nice. And he sent me like the fucking nicest text on like New Year's being like, it's been so cool to watch your transformation and like how honest you've been with yourself and like blah, blah, blah. Like he's a good dude. That show is just like fucking out of control big right now.
I know. Even when he retweeted me once, it was like an avalanche of
it fucking blows
stuff.
Yep. I mean, you'll probably get other press based on him retweeting you. So yeah. So I mean, from a political standpoint, I don't know. But there's also, I mean, it's long lasting. Like I'll have people at jiu-jitsu or I'll have some fucking famous, like, I had like a pro wrestler who I grew up loving DM me the other day and was like, hey, I heard Rogan mention you on the David Pakman episode. So I went back and watched, your thing. And it's like, yeah, if he still mentions me on a show and my shit blows up.
There's somebody mentioned me on the show last fall, I want to say, and I all of a sudden got like a huge inundation of mentions and like everything, and I was like, what is this about? I didn't even know what people were talking about at first, and then I like somebody sent me the clip and I'm like, oh, all right, somebody favorably mentioned me, that's cool.
I heard it and was probably
it is amazing.
seething. That actually ties in. So what did you think of that big New York Times article that lumped Rogan in with the alt-right and was kind of like, if you consume Joe Rogan, you will eventually be a Nazi? I think there is some merit to the YouTube algorithm where, I don't know if it'll lead you to like radicalize Nazism, but I'll certainly like watch a Rogan clip and it'll suggest a Ben Shapiro clip. And I don't agree with
absolutely.
Ben Shapiro, but I do agree with a lot of Rogan. What was your thought on that article?
So you mean the most recent one from like last weekend or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that there were a couple of problems with it. First of all, I should grant up front, like you just did, that it is a real thing for aimless, especially young men, but I guess some women too, just kind of who are like in a uncertain point in their lives, maybe are a little depressed, and just kind of fill their day with YouTube and end up going down some weird rabbit holes, right? I remember I covered Alex Jones before it was cool, really, because I thought that he actually portended something that was culturally emergent.
Oh, dude, I don't know if I've talked about this on the show. Stanhope and I did a show in Austin when I was like 20 years old, and he thought it would be funny to bring Alex Jones up on stage, and I was hosting it, and like all I knew, like people forget Alex Jones was friends with Bill Hicks, like.
There was a rumor that he was Bill Hicks.
Yeah. For anyone like who doesn't know Hicks, he was like the cooler Carlin. He was the Fish to the Grateful Dead's like George Carlin.
And like in the early 2000s or whatever, Alex Jones was perceived more on the left than the right, just because he was so into 9/11 truth, and that was always like a hodgepodge of different political sensibilities under a conspiracy banner, but it was largely associated with the left.
Yes.
So Alex Jones just had a way different persona for a while, and like gradually through the Obama years, he kind of shifted more recognizably right. But before most people really knew who Alex Jones was or thought that it was important to kind of like parse his worldview. I did that, and I actually interviewed him in 2012, which was a bizarre experience, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But I remember like interviewing some of his devotees who had come out to this because they're like the Bilderberg meetings.
Oh my God! Yeah, totally.
It's like a linchpin of his entire conspiracy worldview, and actually, in fairness, it is creepy.
Yep.
That these elites like jet set around the world for the closed door meeting every year. And like Henry Kissinger is always there somehow. I think those meetings are where Henry Kissinger gets injected with his longevity serum because he's like 95 years old.
Right out of my mouth.
He's like 95 years old and went to another Bilderberg a couple weeks ago in like Switzerland or something.
That totally is. They all have to come together, all of the elites, and you can't be missing one, and they all have to bring a sacrifice, and that's how they keep Kissinger alive.
Yeah, they all have to give blood to him or something like that.
Yeah. Fill me with elitist blood.
But in 2012, the Bilderberg meeting was in Chantilly, Virginia, and Alex Jones was having this kind of multi-day rally protest thing. So I went. Most people at that point were just if they were aware of Alex Jones at all, he was just sort of like a nuisance, and they didn't feel like they had to understand him.
Sure.
Which is okay, fair enough.
Yep.
But I went and interviewed him, and I would interview some of his devotees who came to this rally, sometimes from huge distances. I remember talking to one kid about. When I say kid, he's probably 19 or something like that. How did you get into this stuff? He just I was on YouTube one day and I saw a clip. I don't remember how. And then a month later, and somehow I'm now an Alex Jones convert. You know,
seems right.
So the whole thing about going down a YouTube algorithm rabbit hole, I think, is real. But the thing is, what the New York Times and other elite media have tried to do is they put on this alarmist framing where they kind of make it out to be a new and novel phenomenon that young, kind of dislocated, aimless men largely, but not exclusively, are going to be susceptible to like extreme and fringe ideas. That's the demographic that's been susceptible to extreme and fringe ideas throughout human history.
Yeah, we're idiots.
Right. I mean, but like whatever the popular kind of ideology is at the time that's like new and exciting, that's what young people gravitate toward.
Right.
I mean, it almost reminds me of like Charles Manson or like who were his devotees?
Right.
It was like young people who just got sort of brainwashed or whatever. You can find examples of this going throughout history, whether it's like an overtly political dimension, whether it's like more cult-like Manson. I just don't think it's new or as salacious as the New York Times makes it out to be. That the place where people are now getting their extreme views is on YouTube, right? And so I think it is a little. And whenever you see a piece like this, especially if it's in the New York Times, and that's like the gold standard, or the Wall Street Journal,
yeah,
it always almost immediately pressures YouTube into taking some kind of remedial action, because YouTube in particular is hypersensitive to criticism from the prestige press.
Yes.
I mean, they implemented their first quote-unquote apocalypse in 2017, where they basically totally upended their procedures for allowing monetization of videos in response to a Wall Street Journal quote-unquote expose, which found out through like intrepid investigative journalism, supposedly, that like ads were appearing on extreme videos for like promoting, racial theories or whatever. But, very soon after, YouTube basically changed its entire policy. And CNN and Vox was able to do something similar last week with this guy Carlos Maza.
Yeah, I talked about this yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, so supposedly Carlos Maza is marginalized and oppressed, and yet he was able to do a viral tweet thread and get YouTube to cave like overnight to mollify him. I just don't think you're marginalized if you're able to accomplish that.
Right. Right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, because I mean, my point on the show was because you only saw these sort of two extreme sides. It's like, hey, you can call Crowder like a homophobic shithead and also not want massive censorship, which is already sweeping left-wing journalists up in that net. Like left-wing journalists are already getting kicked off YouTube for covering white supremacy because of this purge.
Yeah, but what people like Maza want is for their preferences to be enacted in the policy of the tech companies. And they don't care if there's collateral damage, right, or at least they don't care enough for it to outweigh their calculation as to whether it's appropriate for, if you're in Maza's position, to demand that YouTube or Twitter or whatever platform cater explicitly to you.
Yeah,
and I think that's just sort of an infantile response. I don't like Crowder. I think he's a doofus. I don't think he's even funny. I mean, he's supposedly a comedian, but he's not funny. So he fails at his most basic task.
Sure.
But at the same time, I wouldn't try to counteract Crowder by whining to teacher, or in this case, the people who run YouTube, to like discipline him on my behalf.
Yeah.
It just seems a little.
Well, and it also gives the extreme right validation for a lot of their rhetoric. Like whenever liberals make fun of Trump talking about fake news, it's like, hey, there is a lot of it. And there is a lot of bias. I've never said, I always thought it was a bullshit argument, but they're like, MSNBC is like, the left's Fox News. And it's like, then explain 15 fucking hours of Joe Scarborough, or explain, all the Russia, like Democracy Now! Is what I would consider like left news, I guess. But I do think that in cases like this, there is bias, and there is a lot of bullshit that gets put out there, and there is a lot of clickbait and a lot of this Russia stuff that you've been covering. And so you're giving them validation so that when Trump has actual legitimate criticism and he goes, the elite media, it's just fake news, people go, yeah, it is fake news. They got this guy banned off YouTube, that I listen to. They got this, like it gives them ammunition.
Yeah, and one thing Tulsi's been doing, I think, really well is she's offering a media critique which isn't rooted in the kind of nihilistic Trump-style critique where everything that's unfavorable toward him is fake, but does acknowledge that there are a lot of bad actors in the U.S. media. It's kind of staggering.
Yeah.
And they do produce a lot of garbage.
Yeah.
And you can't cede the territory for discussing that and criticizing that to Trump or the right, or else they're going to be the only ones who you can go to get a comprehensive analysis of what's gone wrong with the media. I mean, somehow in the era of Trump, it's considered a right-wing axiom to say that the media is like the corporate media is bad. Whereas that used to be the province largely of the left.
That was our shit. I know.
But the right, but Trump has co-opted it, and the most on the left have no response because now you're like expected to defend the honor of like CNN and or whatever because they're the last safeguards against this destruction of democracy, which is just a joke.
Totally. Hey, too quick before I let you go. Too quick. I have not been following horse race stuff or really covering a lot of it on the show, but I wanted to ask you two questions about that. The first one, Kamala Harris is being sort of lauded as this like progressive hope, like black woman, very exciting. But I remember when I was covering her years ago, she was essentially like a fucking cop. Like, there was a lot of was she always this progressive? Do you feel like she's been legitimately pushed? I literally just remember every time we covered a story about her, she was doing something like terrible.
Well, now, I mean, she's kind of farcically labeled herself a, quote, progressive prosecutor.
Right.
As if that's not like an oxymoron.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when she was the California Attorney General, basically she was staking out a pretty, a relatively, at least by California standards, hard line law and order position on a variety of issues, such as, when she laughed off the notion of legalizing marijuana in 2014, which was long after several states had legalized marijuana.
Whoa.
And California had a referendum that failed in 2010 to legalize it, and then it passed 2 years later. But in 2014, not that long ago, Kamala was very scornful of the notion of legalizing marijuana, and why would she support that? It was ardently opposed by like the police unions and the prison guard unions, which she relied on for support to some degree.
Well, and also just to be clear, I mean, not to maybe for. I don't know. For some of my audience, I hope this doesn't sound like patronizing, but just to be clear, when you're talking about that or when I talk about laughing off something like that, we're not like, oh man, she didn't want me to get fucking weed. We're talking about like it is a racist policy that has fucking destroyed countless lives, in cohorts with the prison industrial complex, essentially. So, we're going to mock Biden for his crime bill stuff that he said in the 90s, but like Kamala Harris was also doing that very recently.
It's an insanely egregious infringement on just basic civil liberty. And obviously it also has a racial dimension. But even in a humane society, cops should not be arresting people for possessing marijuana. I think most sensible people now, maybe not most, but many sensible people now can agree on that. And they ought to have been able to agree on it in 2014, especially if you're going to portray yourself as a progressive prosecutor. But Kamala Harris, because she was running for office at the time, thought it was a popular thing to do, decided to laugh off the notion of marijuana legalization. And now, sure enough, almost most of the major candidates now are in favor of marijuana legalization, with the exception, I think, of Biden and maybe like Klobuchar and a handful of others.
Goddamn it.
So I think, I almost think it's sort of weird that she tried to position this stalwart progressive, because she might have been better off at just like being true to herself and being like a center left law and order type. So that's what she got elected as in California. But instead she's like twisted herself into a pretzel to like be a champion of progressives. And I almost think there's an opening for her in the Democratic field to be like a moderate type who's like maybe just to the left of Biden in some respects, but isn't trying to outflank like Bernie or Elizabeth Warren, because you're just not going to be able to do that. But I think the logic of her candidacy is getting weaker and weaker. Like, she's declined somewhat in the polls. She was absurdly declared even like a front runner earlier this year, which I never thought was valid. I think she's gonna. I still think she's gonna fizzle quite a bit.
Yeah.
She's just not tested, and there's like stuff in her past. When she was the DA in San Francisco, right?
Yep.
That she got huge criticism from her left during that tenure. And I don't know that. I think people definitely overestimated the extent of her appeal.
Yeah. Okay, last one on this. Do you think I was a huge Bernie supporter when he was running? The only criticism I've heard recently about Bernie is kind of the question of, it's hard because I covered Nader under Obama too. I didn't, I voted for Obama. But like I was with Ralph Nader when Obama won and had to pretend that like it wasn't historic, and I was in like the only room of sad people in like Washington DC while like they just like ate like from a hummus platter. Very awkward. And
isn't that when Nader called him like an Uncle Tom or something?
I think so,
Remember
man.
that?
Yeah. And what I'm wondering is this Biden? Because when Nader ran, even against George Bush, I agreed with that 100%. I will always agree with, look, if there's a candidate saying things that other candidates aren't saying, it's like, step up your shit. Like, I loved when Nader would say, when people would be like, you cost Al Gore the election. It's like, no, Al Gore cost Al Gore the election. And that's true for like a plethora of reasons. Do you think that Bernie running now, because there's so much backlash against him, which, by the way, I 100% disagree with, do you think that some of the criticism now is more valid? Or do you think that he should absolutely be running because he has stuff to say that the other candidates are not?
Well, I voted for him too in 2016. I was never like an outright supporter in the sense that I was in a journalistic capacity. But again, part of my thing is transparency. So I tell people who I vote for, and I voted for Bernie. And I have a broad affinity with him, even if I have some criticisms around the margins. But I think, the rationale for him running this time was always there. He had a national infrastructure that he built up in 2016 that he could then marshal into another run in 2020. I mean, he was the runner-up in 2016. He almost beat Hillary in Iowa, and then he trounced her in New Hampshire.
Right.
So, like, why wouldn't you run if you still want to obtain the presidency if you have that kind of record? And I remember, like, before he announced, there were some columns that were sort of whinging, saying Bernie shouldn't run because he should pass the torch to another progressive champion. It's just like, no, Bernie has a unique political trajectory,
right, where
he started out, he didn't rise up through like the careerist ranks in the Democratic Party. He started out in these like splinter third party groupings in Vermont. I actually went and visited his archive at the University of Vermont in 2015, and you read through all these like old pamphlets and these letters and stuff from the 70s, and it's kind of amazing, like the milieu that he was in at that time.
Oh yeah, I mean he's been doing like badass progressive stuff forever.
Yeah, and it's just like you can't. It's not as if Bernie can say, okay, I support this person, and somehow automatically his entire support base is going to transfer to that person. And he endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016, and a lot of his supporters did not vote for her in the general election.
Oh, and then he still gets blamed for that. He was like, he didn't endorse her nicely enough.
Right. Even though, like, yeah, I mean, he had an exchange, I think, in Nevada a week or two ago, where somebody was challenging him on not doing enough for Hillary, and he's just like, "Are you aware that I was like flying everywhere in the country and like busting my ass for somebody who I didn't even really like? Like, what more do you want from me?"
Classic socialist lies.
Right. So it's funny because his support for Hillary hasn't really redounded to his political benefit much, in the sense that the forces within the party that are hostile to him are just as hostile and like weren't placated by his support for her in the general election. So like arguably he might as well have just not have endorsed her, just like kept up the total outsider image. But he has tried to ingratiate himself somewhat with the party. Like he's co-written op-eds with like Chuck Schumer. He tried to basically get on good terms with the DNC, that kind of thing, which is like reasonable strategy, because in order to win a Democratic nomination, you do have to get some of the quote normie Democrats on your side. You can't just rely on the ideologically committed left wingers, because that's just not a big enough portion of the party.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think the logic for him running was sound. I mean, he just delivered a speech today in Washington. I don't know if you saw any of it, but he was basically he was reiterating a forceful defense of democratic socialism, and it was a pretty good speech. I mean,
That's awesome.
I just don't think any other candidate would be positioned to make that kind of speech. And I think even especially at this early stage, like the people should run if they feel like they have something unique to contribute. So that's why Tulsi, I think, has something unique to contribute. Therefore, she should run. And even if you can't predict what the ultimate outcome is going to be, it doesn't matter. The presidential election system in the United States is so protracted, where it starts like 2 years in advance, that there's utility in running separate and apart from what the outcome of primaries and caucuses is, because it's a huge platform. And a huge opportunity to advance your ideas. So, I mean, I think in that sense, it makes sense for a lot of these people to run, which is why we have an absurd number of candidates running.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think the danger for Bernie is we're now entering a political climate that's going to be dominated, I think, by impeachment. Trump made another comment today that people are losing their minds about, where he said he would like accept information from a foreigner
I saw
about. Which is, I was like, that seems a little. I mean, the reaction to it is a little hysterical. I mean, I think you're telling me that
on Twitter with Trump, hysterical.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that, right? But like, okay, so you're telling me if a Norwegian or a Canadian got in touch with a Kamala Harris staffer and says, "Hey, we have some negative information on Trump," that Kamala Harris staffer would then immediately run to the FBI and say, "Hey, a crime is in progress."
Yeah, that's a pretty solid analogy.
That's basically what Trump said. But anyway, and their whole kind of free speech concerns around like criminalizing the receipt of information simply because it happens to come from a foreigner.
Right.
Anyway, it's just gonna ramp up the impeachment talk. And if you look at the polls recently, Warren has gone up somewhat, and there are actually polls today where she overtook Bernie in some of the national polls and in the polls in Nevada. And I think that a lot of that is a result of Warren being very aggressive and early on in demanding impeachment, and kind of sucking up all the energy that was in the Democratic coalition for a candidate who was actively demanding impeachment. And Warren is positioned to do that competently because she's a law professor. She's a lawyer. So she can engage with the substance of like the Mueller report, of obstruction of justice, that kind of stuff. Whereas that's just not Bernie's forte. I mean, he wants to talk about Wall Street and oligarchs and stuff. He doesn't want to get into the weeds of, was this a campaign finance violation? Should we impeach on the basis of it? Whatever. So I think, assuming, as I think is very likely, that the next couple months at least are dominated by more impeachment talk, it's just not a climate very well suited to Bernie. And I think that's part of why you see Warren rising somewhat and Bernie stagnating somewhat.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Well, listen, man, I will let you go. I appreciate this so much. This was so nice. Talk about all this stuff. I hope we can hang out on a rooftop in Brooklyn soon. And then anytime you have a new piece that you want to plug, like, come on and we'll just talk about the article. Like, this was fucking great for me, man.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Good to talk to you again. Send me the audio file and I'll post it on my own podcast and YouTube and whatever, and then we'll do the whole podcast.
Yay!
The podcast support ecosystem thing.
Yeah, and let's be pals. I'll send you my number.
All right, sounds good.
All right, brother. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
Bye.
All right, there you have it. I will post a link on the various places where this podcast appears to Jamie's podcast, if you're inclined to subscribe to that. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher. Subscribe on YouTube, please. I'd be very grateful for that. And if you want to contribute via Patreon and or PayPal, also do that. And I will talk to you later.